Imagine you're exhausted, drained from carrying the weight of your entire world alone in a broken bar, and suddenly life places an unexpected stranger in your path as someone who could change everything. Stay with me till the end, because this story of a struggling single mom who falls asleep on a stranger's shoulder will leave you speechless and inspired. Sarah was only 28, but her weary eyes told a story of decades of struggle. She was a single mother, working 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Every morning, she dropped her 6-year-old son Daniel off at school, then rushed to a diner where she served coffee and smiles she didn't feel, before running to her night shift at a local convenience store. By the time she made it back home, her legs were trembling and her back was screaming with pain, but her son's laughter was the only medicine she had. That morning, she barely had the strength to stand at the bus stop. Rain trickled down her worn coat, and her shoes, already torn, let the water seep in. When the bus finally arrived, she climbed in with slow steps and collapsed onto the nearest empty seat. Her eyes felt heavy, but she knew she still had a full shift ahead of her. Next to her sat a man in a crisp suit, holding a leather briefcase. He looked important and out of place on a crowded city bus, but Sarah was too tired to notice or care. The moment the bus jolted forward, her head leaned unconsciously against his shoulder. At first, she tried to pull away in embarrassment, but the warmth of his shoulder and the security it gave her was too much. Before she knew it, she drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks. When the bus stopped, Sarah woke up suddenly and gasped in shock. She hadn't just leaned on him, she had been asleep on this stranger's shoulder for nearly an hour. Flustered, she whispered an apology, clutching her worn-out bag. But instead of annoyance, the man smiled gently. "You must be very tired," he said softly, his voice carrying a kindness she hadn't expected. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't explain her life story to a stranger on the bus. She just nodded, embarrassed, and rushed off at her stop. But what she didn't realize was that he had noticed the crumpled job application form sticking out of her bag. The next day, Sarah went about her routine as usual, never expecting to see him again. But life has its own way of weaving people's paths together. When she walked into the diner to start her morning shift, she froze. Sitting at one of the tables was the same man from the bus, only this time, he wasn't just a passenger. People around her whispered as they recognized him, Mr. Ethan Cole, the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the city. Sarah's face flushed red. She wanted to hide, but Ethan simply smiled as if he'd been waiting for her. He ordered a coffee and asked her, almost casually, "Do you always work this hard?" She stuttered, unsure how to respond. Why would someone like him care about someone like her? Over the next few weeks, Ethan came back again and again, always sitting in Sarah's section, always asking small questions about her day, her son, her dreams. Slowly, Sarah opened up as though she never asked for pity. She told him about Daniel, about how she'd put her own education on hold, about the nights she stayed awake worrying about bills. She admitted, quietly, that she once dreamed of becoming an interior designer but gave it all up when life pushed her in another direction. One day, after her shift ended, Ethan stopped her before she could leave. "Sarah," he said gently, "do you remember that application form I saw in your bag on the bus? You were applying for a receptionist job, right?" Her heart sank. She didn't even get a call back for that. "Yes," she whispered. Ethan looked at her with eyes that seemed to see more than just her struggles. "You have potential, more than you realize. I want you to come in for an interview at my company, not for a receptionist job but for something better." Sarah's first instinct was to say number. She thought he was just being kind out of pity, but when Ethan insisted, she reluctantly agreed. A week later, she walked nervously into the shining glass doors of his company. To her surprise, the interview wasn't a formality. They genuinely saw something in her organizational skills, her eye for design, and her resilience. She was offered a position in the design department, with training included. For the first time in years, Sarah felt hope blooming inside her. Her days were still long, but they were filled with purpose now. Daniel noticed too. His mom smiled more, laughed more, even hummed when she cooked dinner. Months passed, and Sarah grew in her role, climbing higher in the company with hard work and determination. And Ethan, he didn't just fade into the background. He was there, quietly cheering her on, giving her the push she never knew she needed. One evening, after a long day, Sir found herself once again on the same bus. This time, it was Ethan who leaned his head on her shoulder. She chuckled softly, and he said, "See, it feels nice to have someone to lean on, doesn't it?" Tears welled in her eyes, because for the first time, she truly believed she wasn't alone anymore. The woman who once cried herself to sleep at night was now standing tall, not just for her son but for herself. And all it took was one exhausted moment on a bus, one act of kindness, and the courage to keep going. So if you've ever felt like life is too heavy, remember Sir's story, because sometimes the person you least expect can become the miracle you've been waiting for. And sometimes as a broken bar all it takes is the courage to lean on someone's shoulder.